Sorry, but this area is reserved for invited VIPs only." The words landed like a sentence. 2 guards in tailored suits stood before her, arms crossed, expressions carved from authority. Their tone wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to draw attention. Heads turned. Murmurs spread through the crowd as eyes drifted over her simple military-style khaki jacket, the worn patches on the shoulders, the regulation boots. Not a dress. Not silk. And certainly not what the other mothers wore to this elite high school's graduation ceremony. June Maddox didn't flinch. She didn't argue or plead. Her gaze simply shifted toward the stage, scanning the rows of seats for her son, Ethan. 17. Tall. Brilliant. Mixed race. His name was printed in bold on the program as valedictorian. He had earned that title, and she had earned the right to witness it. When the guards gestured again, polite, practiced, but insistent, June rose slowly. Not because she agreed, but because she knew how this world worked. Not her place. Not her people. Not her rules. If you've ever been turned away, not for what you've done, but for who you are, or who they assume you are, then you already know this moment. You've lived it. And if you haven't, stay. Because in about 10 minutes, this very crowd, this very stage, and these very guards will be struck silent. June wouldn't be the one needing rescue. But someone would. Her chair had a neatly taped label across the back. MADDOX. She had arrived early, slipping quietly past the gathering crowd that buzzed across the front lawn. The folding chairs sat in flawless rows beneath a white canopy, the kind rented for fundraisers and donor galas. June settled in the 4th row, just behind the board members and sponsors. She gave the usher a polite nod, folded her hands, and drew a slow breath. Her jacket was faded, standard issue, years old. The faint Maddox patch over her left pocket was nearly worn through. Her boots were polished but thinning at the soles. Her hair was pulled back tight, revealing sharp features that spoke not of comfort, but endurance. It didn't take long. Within 10 minutes, Mrs. Bellamy arrived, wrapped in coral designer silk, oversized sunglasses resting atop perfect blonde curls. She glided as though the ground existed only to meet her heels. Her husband trailed 2 steps behind, carrying a cushion and a monogrammed fan. When her gaze landed on June, she sniffed once, like someone noticing something out of place, an unwanted decoration. Leaning toward another mother in a flowing floral dress, she whispered, loud enough for 3 rows to catch, "I thought we were keeping the photo section clear of clutter." The reaction was subtle but swift. Principal Kent, stationed near the podium, received a hastily scribbled note. His brow furrowed. He scanned the rows, nodded once, and within minutes, security was in motion. They didn't rush. They didn't draw attention. That was their craft, quiet correction disguised as courtesy. "Ma'am," one guard said in a carefully neutral voice, "would you mind stepping aside? We need to make space for a few last-minute arrangements." June looked up, calm and unshaken. "This is my seat," she replied softly but firmly. "My son is the valedictorian." "Yes, ma'am," the second guard said with a faint nod. "It's only temporary. We'll make sure you still have a great view." June's fingers tightened on the folded program. Then she stood, not in defeat, but in understanding. She'd learned long ago how this town played its games. No raised voice. No protest. Just quiet grace. Her heels clicked softly as she followed them. First, they moved her back 1 row. Then another mother from the fundraising committee needed a seat. Then another parent. Step by step, June found herself relocated, until she sat in the 10th row, beneath a sagging banner that read, "Congratulations, Class of 2024. No one sat beside her. No one spoke to her. The air smelled of fresh mulch and expensive perfume, both foreign to her. Around her, parents traded stories of vacation homes and alumni donations. June kept her eyes on the stage. She didn't blink when the names began to be called. When the wind tugged at her collar, she adjusted it slightly, revealing more of the faded name patch. From her seat, she could see Ethan, standing near the platform's edge, poised and composed, his curls brushed back, his expression calm, exactly as she taught him. Never let them see they've hurt you. His robe was pressed, his shoes spotless. He belonged up there. He'd earned it, Through nights studying at the diner counter, dawn rides in borrowed trucks, and rejection letters she'd taught him to laugh at. He didn't know she'd been moved. Not yet. And June wanted it that way. Let him believe she was where she should be. Now Mrs. Bellamy sat comfortably in June's original seat. She adjusted her wrap, opened her compact mirror. The usher brought her chilled water. A photographer snapped a photo. June caught the flash and turned her head away. No anger. No surprise. Just a quiet steadiness born from years of being underestimated. Far beyond the canopy, past the VIP tables and donor booths, 6 men stood along the school's perimeter. They didn't move or speak, but they saw everything. One leaned toward another, whispered, and got a single nod in reply. Plain shirts. Dark slacks. Polished shoes. Their posture gave them away. Straight backs, steady eyes, scanning exits and angles by instinct. They weren't there for the school. They were there for a promise. A debt owed. They hadn't told June they were coming. They didn't need to. Each had received the same message months ago. Ethan Maddox, June's boy, is graduating. As Principal Kent approached the microphone and the audience quieted, June settled back in her seat. She didn't fidget. She didn't look around. She sat still, invisible, yet unshakable. They had taken her seat. But they could never take her place. She was here. And that was enough. Like instinct, they stood not for the school, but for a promise, a debt owed. They hadn't told June they would come. They hadn't needed to. Each of them had received the same message months earlier. Ethan Maddox. June's boy. Graduation. As the principal approached the microphone and the crowd quieted, June settled back in her chair. She didn't fidget. She didn't glance around. She sat still, silent, unseen, unmovable. They might have taken her seat, but they could never take her place. She was here. And that was enough. His name was Marco. He worked with machines, grease beneath his fingernails, a wrench in one hand, and a battered thermos of black coffee in the other. His laugh was too loud for quiet rooms, and he danced in kitchens where no music played. Marco had been born just a few blocks from where June grew up. But in this town, that didn't matter. He was a second-generation Latino, son of a welder and a waitress. And no matter how crisp his uniform or steady his paycheck, he wasn't the kind of man girls like June were expected to bring home. June had been 21, stuck between finishing her associate's degree or finally moving out. The day she met Marco, her car stalled outside Bailey's Auto and Tire. He fixed it in 15 minutes, refused her money, and handed her a business card with his number scrawled on the back. "In case it acts up again," he said. It did. She called. That's how it started, not with fairy tales or grand gestures, but beneath a hydraulic lift and the smell of diesel. Their first date was barbecue and a game of pool at Manny's. The second, the city library, where she watched him quietly help a child find a picture book in Spanish. She didn't yet understand how dangerous kindness could appear to some people. But she would learn. She brought him home on a Sunday, right as the roast came out of the oven. Her father stiffened at the door, his eyes narrowing at Marco's brown skin and firm handshake. Her mother smiled too brightly, spoke too softly, and wouldn't meet anyone's gaze through dinner. By dessert, the silence was heavier than words. They didn't speak of it then, not that night, not the next, but it lingered between them, the same way whispers followed when they walked down Main Street holding hands. The comments came later. "Are you sure he's not just using you to get out of the garage? His kind doesn't usually stick around. Aren't you worried about what kind of life you're choosing?" That last one stayed with her. When they married 6 months later at the courthouse, no one from her family showed up. They signed the license and drove straight back to their double-wide trailer, where Marco had stocked the fridge with champagne and leftover carne asada. June laughed through tears that night. She had chosen her life, chosen right, but she had also chosen isolation. They built a life out of long weekends and quiet mornings. Marco took extra shifts. June cleaned houses during the day and studied for her GED at night. When Ethan was born, they had $37 in savings and a freezer full of frozen waffles. But he was healthy, full head of black hair, his father's wide, curious eyes. June fell in love all over again, with her son, her husband, and the life they were shaping inch by inch. But good things rarely stay untouched. Marco's accident happened on a Tuesday. The lift cable snapped, a worn link that should have been replaced months before. June got the call while changing Ethan's bedsheets. By the time she reached the hospital, it was too late. Marco was gone, crushed beneath a car he'd crawled under to help a young trainee who hadn't shown up for his shift. The garage denied liability. The safety reports were vague. June hired a lawyer. The case disappeared quietly. Insufficient evidence, they said. There was no funeral crowd, no casseroles, no flowers. Neighbors peeked through curtains as she carried Ethan down the porch steps that week, but no one came to her door. A woman from the post office mailed a sympathy card with no return address. Another left an envelope with two $20 bills. Then, silence, the kind that makes you question whether anyone ever heard you at all. She tried to move to a better school district. We're full. Applied for a small business loan to fix cars from home. Need collateral. Looked for grief groups. All spots taken. When she enrolled Ethan in kindergarten, the administrator smiled politely and said he'd be placed with more accommodating peers. He was 5. That first week, he came home asking why other kids said he looked like someone on TV. June didn't explain. She just held him tighter. After he went to bed, she studied. Not just for herself anymore, but for him. She learned to fix lawnmowers, change brake pads, replace HVAC systems. Nights turned into years. She worked gas stations, auto shops, anywhere that paid, keeping her head down, never inviting pity, and never forgetting. Not the looks they gave Marco. Not the way they erased him. Not the way they treated Ethan like an exception instead of a child. It burned, slow, steady, and silent. But it never went out. From that fire, June built steel. The town had taken Marco. It had tried to take her son's place before he even had one. But June wasn't here just to watch Ethan graduate. She was here to prove that nothing, no whisper, no stare, no reassigned seat, could erase what she had built. She had earned her place. And she would keep it. Years passed. June became known not only as a skilled mechanic, but as a woman who noticed things others missed. Her garage turned into a haven for the overlooked and underpaid. She charged fair prices, listened more than she spoke. And when a man from the local VA clinic rolled in one morning with a blown radiator and a flyer for a civil, the defense training program appeared on his dashboard, and by the time he left, his car was fixed, and her name was quietly added to the next recruitment list. The program itself operated under the radar, a partnership between the state's Emergency Response Division and retired military veterans. Its goal was simple but ambitious: prepare civilians to assist when everything else failed, during floods, riots, blackouts, or full-scale urban collapse. June applied without expectation. She wasn't a veteran. She didn't have connections or medals. But she possessed something far rarer than credentials: clarity. 2 weeks later, a call came. When she arrived at the training compound outside Fort Logan, she wore work boots and a worn, patched jacket. Most recruits were ex-firefighters, paramedics, or recently retired soldiers. June stood out immediately, short, pale, quiet, but she carried herself like someone bearing invisible weight, and she never once complained. By the third day of orientation, the instructors introduced the embedded SEAL trainees, 6 men, all under 30, assigned there for a 2-month urban reconnaissance rotation. The purpose was cross-training, blending military precision with civilian adaptability. Most of the civilian recruits were wide-eyed. June wasn't. She gave a single nod and went back to her map. They started noticing her in the second week. During a simulated urban hostage extraction, June redirected 2 units through an alley that didn't even exist on the official grid. Old city schematics, she explained when questioned. Most places don't update them fast enough. The SEAL commander raised an eyebrow. One of the recruits whispered, "Who is this chick?" He learned soon enough, 30 minutes later, when June spotted an ambush in the northwest quadrant before the drone feed even registered it. By week 3, she had a nickname, Guide. Not as a joke, but as acknowledgement. She taught them how to read wind direction by the pattern of fallen leaves, how to anticipate choke points and alley structures from building spacing, how to sense flaws in plans that looked flawless on paper. They taught her in return, movement patterns, stairwell tactics, how to clear a room without dying in it. But she never tried to blend in. She didn't need to. Then came the heatstroke drill. The scenario was a simulated city blackout. Navigate checkpoints. Evacuate civilians. During the exercise, one of the younger SEALs, Deacon, collapsed near a loading dock. No one saw him fall except June. She sprinted back alone, dragged him across the asphalt, tore off his vest, and poured the last of her canteen over his face and neck while shouting for medics. The instructors later reviewed the footage. She reached him 23 seconds before the nearest medic. After that, the tone around her shifted. No more side remarks. No sideways glances. They listened when she spoke. A wiry sniper named Hartley began joining her at lunch, unfolding old satellite recon maps between bites. "What would you do here?" he asked repeatedly. She told him. Every time, he nodded and learned. The final day of the program arrived without ceremony. No speeches, no plaques, just a handshake and a plain brown envelope with her certificate inside. But that night, as she packed her truck, the 6 men approached quietly. Each handed her a dark green patch, canvas, marked with a number, 6. Beneath it, one word stitched in dull thread, guide. No goodbyes. Just nods. Then they walked away. The following week, they deployed. June never spoke about it, not to Ethan, not to anyone. It wasn't a story for bragging. It was simply something that had happened and passed. Still, she kept that patch folded in her glove box for years, a quiet reminder that even if the world saw only a small woman in dusty boots, 6 men out there remembered the difference she made. June stayed composed. "This seat has my name on it," she said evenly. "I understand," the usher replied, his tone still polite but edged with insistence. "We've been advised by administration." There it was, the invisible chain of hierarchy, disguised as logistics, descending from the principal's office. June stood without protest. She didn't argue or raise her voice. She gathered her things, a folded program and her pride, and stepped aside. They moved her 1 row back. Then another. A parent with a shiny lanyard and a glossy invitation appeared, and June was shifted again. It kept happening, subtle and efficient, until she found herself in the 10th row, near the edge of the canopy, sunlight creeping across her knees and dust swirling at her feet. From here, she could still see the stage, still see the podium where her son would stand, but the distance between them had deepened, not in space, but in principle. Behind her, chatter rippled through the rows, vacation plans, college acceptances, and business deals. A woman with a cutting laugh boasted about a property closing. No one acknowledged June. No smiles, no words of sympathy. She could have been carved from stone. Still, she didn't fidget or glance back. Her eyes stayed fixed on the stage as the faculty filed in, organizing the graduates. It didn't take her long to find Ethan, steady, focused, his robe crisp, tassel straight. He scanned the crowd briefly, and June held her breath, praying he wouldn't notice she'd been moved. If he saw it, it would wound him. And today wasn't a day for that. No one else saw the 6 men standing at the edge of the field since the crowd began to gather. They blended in, not because of their clothes, but their posture. Still, watchful, the kind of presence that suggested they knew how to wait. No signs. No uniforms. But the way they scanned the perimeter made it obvious they were different. They hadn't been invited. They didn't need to be. They were already there when June was escorted back. They saw every quiet displacement, every polite smile that pushed her farther from the front. They didn't speak, but with each move, their stance grew sharper, stiller. One of them, a tall man with a square jaw and streaks of gray at his temples, murmured, "She hasn't said a word." The man beside him nodded. She wouldn't. In her seat, June exhaled softly. Her hands rested in her lap, one thumb brushing the edge of the patch sewn inside her jacket. She didn't need to touch it to remember it was there, but she did anyway. She hadn't seen those 6 men in years. Hadn't spoken to them since Fort Logan. But bonds forged under heat didn't rely on reminders. They relied on readiness. And somewhere deep inside, she already knew, they were here. The ceremony unfolded as expected. Tidy, polished, predictable. The choir sang, the principal welcomed, The student president cracked a rehearsed joke about finals. Parents clapped, laughed on cue, and dabbed at tears when the script demanded. June sat still, her posture steady, gaze locked on the stage where the graduates waited their turn. From this distance, Ethan looked older somehow, taller, jaw set, the kind of composure that belonged to someone already prepared to lead. Then came the roll call. Names echoed from the loudspeakers, each followed by applause and camera flashes. Parents leaned forward, waving frantically, immortalizing their pride in pixels and smiles. June didn't move. No camera. No sign. Just the rhythm of her breath, steady as it had been when breath once meant survival. A few rows ahead, Mrs. Bellamy basked in her moment. Her daughter glided across the stage in silk, pausing for applause and air kisses. Cameras flashed. Pride trapped in frames. Bellamy glanced back once, satisfaction gleaming, but not at June. It never was. The ceremony's rhythm hummed on, until a subtle break in the tempo. Not enough to alarm, just enough to draw eyes. From the far west edge came the distinct crunch of gravel under synchronized steps, measured, deliberate, unhurried. A tall man appeared first, lean, composed, in a dark suit and tie. Behind him, another. Then another. 6 in all, moving in quiet unison down the central aisle. No hurry, no noise, but an authority that shifted the air itself. The crowd parted around them instinctively, like water splitting for stone. June noticed first. Her heart didn't race, it steadied. A long, buried breath rising from years of restraint. People turned. Murmurs spread. The principal leaned toward an aide, confusion creasing his face. "Do you know them?" he whispered. She shook her head. "No one does." The 6 men reached the base of the stage and halted. They didn't look to the principal. They didn't seek permission. One stepped forward, reached into his jacket, and withdrew a small piece of green cloth. He handed it to the nearest usher, a patch, identical to the one sewn inside June's coat. Green canvas. Unit insignia. The number 6. And one stitched word, guide. Then the man faced the audience, his voice cutting clearly through the summer air. "We came to honor the woman who taught us to think when fear said run. Who wore no rank but earned command. Who saved one of us from heatstroke, and all of us from silence." He turned toward the 10th row, where June sat. June sat motionless, her eyes glimmering. "That woman," the man said quietly, "right there." A hush descended. No one stirred, not the parents, not even the graduates. He continued, voice steady, never raised. "We call her guide. You call her the mother of the valedictorian. Either way, no one here deserves the front row more than she does." The words didn't echo, they landed, heavy and absolute. Ethan froze behind the podium, just for a breath. Then he stepped down 2 small steps and walked toward the men. When he reached them, he extended his hand. All 6 saluted in perfect unison, crisp, precise, reverent. No one spoke. Even Mrs. Bellamy, half-turned in her chair, seemed uncertain whether to stand or vanish. The silence wasn't awkward, it was sacred. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, maybe a teacher, maybe a student, came a single clap. The sound cracked through the stillness like a match striking stone. Another joined in. Then another. Within seconds, applause thundered across the field, rolling like summer storm clouds. People stood, not because they were told to, but because something inside them demanded they rise. June stayed seated. Her gaze never left Ethan. Her hand brushed her jacket, fingers pressing lightly over the patch sewn beneath. Her back straightened, not in pride, but in peace. What needed saying had been spoken. This time, she hadn't needed to speak it herself. The principal struggled to reclaim the microphone. His voice, once smooth and rehearsed, cracked as he stumbled through the rest of the program. His hands shook, just enough for the papers to flutter. He read the final names in a monotone rush, eyes never drifting toward the back again. Mrs. Bellamy said nothing. Her daughter folded her arms, cheeks flushed, unable to reclaim the spotlight that had slipped forever from her grasp. The seals didn't move. They stood silent, unmoving, until the final name was called, until the last caps arced into the air. Only then did they turn, slow and wordless, and disappear behind the oak tree's shade, No press, no farewell, no need. They hadn't come for the crowd. They had come for her. When the last cheer faded and the graduates spilled into clusters of joy, flowers, balloons, flashing cameras, June remained where she was, anchored like a fixed point on a spinning compass. A few teachers passed, offering hesitant smiles or quiet nods. One paused, bent slightly, and whispered, "Thank you, for more than today." June only nodded. She didn't need to reply. It wasn't the applause she heard echoing in her mind. It was the image of Ethan walking past every other graduate to reach the men. The sound of 6 voices speaking not with flattery, but with truth. The way the people who had worked hardest to overlook her could no longer unsee what had just unfolded. Some moments don't shout, they shift the story by simply existing. This was hers. The ovation following the SEAL's tribute could have ended the ceremony. It felt final, like a full stop. But there was still one name left to call. When the principal finally spoke again, his voice was softer, stripped of polish. Valedictorian, Ethan Maddox. The crowd leaned forward again, but this time not from habit, out of reverence. Ethan crossed the stage slowly, every step deliberate, his gaze fixed not on the principal, not the crowd, but the 10th row, on June. The diploma in his hand felt lighter than it should have, lighter than the weight he'd carried that morning. He turned toward the microphone. The silence settled again. He didn't unfold his speech. The pages stayed untouched at the base of the podium. "I had a speech prepared," he began, his tone calm but unwavering. "A good one, actually. It had jokes, quotes, even a story about my math teacher's cat." A few uncertain chuckles rippled through the crowd. "But I'm not going to read it," he continued, "because what I plan to say doesn't matter as much as what needs to be said right now." He nodded toward the back rows. "My mother has been overlooked, dismissed, and pushed aside by this town for as long as I can remember. Some of you don't even know her name, but you should. Because everything I've done, every paper, every competition, every long night, I did with her hand steadying mine from behind the curtain. And today, she wasn't even allowed to keep her seat." A few heads bowed. Others shifted uneasily. Bellamy's fixed smile trembled, brittle and pale. Ethan's voice grew firmer. "You talk about values here, respect, service, excellence. But those aren't decorations for a hallway. They're meant to be lived. And no one has lived them more truly than the woman who taught emergency field tactics to special forces without ever firing a gun. Who raised me alone while working nights. Who never asked for recognition but gave everything." He gestured toward the back, where the SEALs stood like sentinels beneath the flag. "Those men didn't come today for show or politics. They came because they remember what this town tried to forget. They came because someone you ignored once saved them." The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. It filled the air, pressed against every chest. Ethan leaned closer to the mic, voice low, steady. "Her name is June Maddox. And if this school truly values what it claims, it will remember her name as surely as it remembers its founders and its banners. Because people like her don't just pass through, they build the ground we stand on." June sat motionless, her eyes shimmering. That woman, right there. A hush swept over the crowd. No one stirred, not the parents, not even the graduates. The man continued, voice steady, unhurried. "Today, we call her guide. You know her as the mother of the valedictorian. Either way, no one here deserves a front row more than she does." The words didn't echo. They settled, heavy, final. Ethan stood frozen behind the podium for only a heartbeat before stepping down 2 steps and walking toward the men. When he reached them, he extended his hand. In response, all 6 saluted in perfect sync, crisp, sharp, reverent. The crowd stayed silent. Even Bellamy, still half turned in her chair, looked uncertain whether to stand or shrink away. The silence wasn't awkward, it was sacred. Then, somewhere, a student, maybe a teacher, began to clap. A single sound, striking through the stillness like a spark against stone. Another joined in. Then another. Within seconds, the applause swelled, rolling across the lawn like thunder. People rose, not out of politeness, but from something deeper, a pull they couldn't resist. June stayed seated, her gaze fixed on Ethan. Her hand brushed the front of her jacket, her spine straightening, Not from pride, but from closure. Everything that needed saying had finally been said, and for once, she hadn't been the one to say it. The principal tried to reclaim the microphone. His voice, normally polished and practiced, wavered as he stumbled through the closing announcements. His fingers shook just enough to betray him. He read the remaining names in a flat, mechanical rhythm, never once looking toward the back rows again. Mrs. Bellamy said nothing for the rest of the ceremony. Her daughter crossed her arms, her practiced smile crumbling under the weight of the moment. The spotlight had shifted, and for once, no amount of money could drag it back. The seals didn't move. They remained at attention until the last name was read, until the final cap arced skyward. Only then did they step aside in quiet formation, fading into the shade of a nearby oak. No press. No statement. No need. They hadn't come for recognition, they had come for her. When the last cheer faded and students surged forward for photos, June stayed seated, anchored, unmoving, like the last fixed point on a compass that refused to spin. A few teachers passed with polite smiles or small nods. One leaned close, whispering, "Thank you for more than today." Nothing else. Nothing needed. What echoed in June's mind wasn't the applause or the spectacle. It was the way Ethan had walked past the graduates without hesitation, the way those 6 men had spoken of her not with pity, but with reverence. And most of all, it was the realization that nothing, no power, no influence, could erase what had just been witnessed. There are moments that rewrite a story, not with noise, but with undeniable truth. This was hers. The applause following the seal's tribute could have ended the ceremony. It should have. It felt final, like punctuation. But one name remained. As the principal's shaken voice announced, "Valedictorian, Ethan Maddox," the crowd leaned forward, not out of expectation, but out of respect. Ethan crossed the stage slowly, deliberate with every step. He didn't look at the principal or the crowd, only at the 10th row, where his mother still sat. The diploma in his hand felt weightless compared to everything she had carried for him. At the podium, silence fell again. He didn't glance at his notes. The folded pages stayed untouched. Instead, he set both hands on the wood, took a breath, and faced them all, parents, teachers, students, and the 6 men standing like sentinels at the back. "I had a speech prepared," Ethan began, his voice calm but steady. "It was a good one, had jokes, quotes, even a story about my math teacher's cat." A few soft laughs rippled through the crowd. "But I won't be reading it." He paused, letting the quiet stretch. "Because what I was going to say doesn't matter as much as what needs to be said right now." He nodded toward the back, where June Saturday, "My mother has been pushed aside, ignored, and overlooked by this town for as long as I can remember. Some of you don't even know her name. But you should. Because everything I've accomplished, every paper, every competition, every sleepless night, I did it with her hand steadying mine, just out of sight. And today, she wasn't even allowed to keep her seat." A ripple of discomfort moved through the rows. Bellamy sat stiff, her smile frozen, brittle as glass. Ethan's voice grew stronger. "You talk about values here, respect, service, excellence. But those aren't slogans to hang in a hallway. They're things you live. And no one has lived them more completely than the woman who trained special forces in field tactics without ever firing a gun. Who raised me alone, working nights. Who never asked for acknowledgement but gave everything." He turned slightly, gesturing to the men at the back. "Those men didn't come here for politics or publicity. They came because they remember what this town chose to forget. They came because someone you dismissed saved them." The silence that followed was deeper than before, thick, absolute. It pressed down on every chest. Ethan leaned closer to the microphone, his voice low but resonant. "Her name is June Maddox. And if this school values even half of what it claims, then it will remember her name like it remembers its founders and its championship banners. Because people like her don't just pass through." He paused. "They build foundations." He stepped back. No closing joke. No clever sign-off. The truth needed no decoration. As he turned from the podium, the audience rose again, this time not in confusion, but in understanding. It wasn't applause anymore. It was acknowledgement. The principal clapped stiffly, his face flushed, eyes never quite meeting June's. Bellamy whispered something to her husband, who stayed motionless, fingers interlocked. A few teachers wiped their eyes. And somewhere in the center of it all, June exhaled, the breath she'd been holding since Ethan was born. When Ethan descended the stage, he didn't return to the graduates. He walked straight to her. Leaning down, he kissed her cheek and whispered 3 words, "We made it." She didn't cry, not yet, but her hands trembled as she adjusted his collar. They sat together through the final readings, through the closing prayer, through the rising cheer as caps filled the sky. Silent. Unmoved. United. When the crowd thinned and the noise faded, the seals approached, one by one. Each shook Ethan's hand. But when they reached June, they didn't offer handshakes, they saluted. Most of the crowd had drifted away by then, chasing photos and dinners, but those who remained saw something beyond tradition, a quiet line of soldiers honoring not a commander, but a teacher, the woman this town had nearly erased. One of them spoke softly, his tone edged with respect. "Ma'am, some things can't be measured in medals. You taught us half our playbook." Another added, "And the other half, we learned just watching how you carry weight." June met each of their eyes. "I didn't do anything you wouldn't have done," she said simply. "I just didn't let anyone tell me I couldn't." Hartley, the sniper from her training days, stepped forward and placed something in her hand. It was the same patch she'd once kept sewn inside her jacket. Only now, beneath the word guide, a new line glimmered in gold thread, "Honorary Command." June traced its edge with her thumb, then nodded. She didn't need applause. She never had. But she accepted the gesture for what it was. Not ceremony, not sympathy, but truth, finally seen. Behind her, a teacher who once avoided her in the hallway stood quietly, phone in hand, not filming, not intruding, just watching. Maybe, at last, understanding. June walked away not as a guest of the ceremony, but as its axis, not with fanfare, but with gravity. By the time she and Ethan reached the edge of the crowd, the sun had already begun to sink. Families called for taxis, snapped photos, gathered flowers. The air buzzed with celebration, but around June, there was calm, the still eye of a storm. A few strangers lingered, unsure if they'd just witnessed something sacred. An older man, an army vet by his cap, approached, eyes wet. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you've done this country proud." He left before she could answer. Ethan stood beside her, words failing him. The weight of the moment hadn't settled, but something inside both of them had shifted. The ceremony was over, but what it sparked would not fade. They walked in silence to the truck. For the first time in years, June let her shoulders drop. "Do you think they'll remember today?" Ethan asked. June opened the passenger door, glanced back toward the field, and said softly, "They'll try not to. But it's too late. It happened." They didn't go out to celebrate. No reservations. No toasts. Instead, they grabbed burgers from the only diner still open, drove home with the windows cracked to the night air, and ate in the driveway under the porch light's hum. Ethan laid his diploma on the dashboard like something fragile. June said little, her silence full, not empty. Later that week, a photo appeared in the local paper. Ethan at the podium, June seated behind him, the seals flanking her. The caption didn't name her, but the article did, "The Woman in the Jacket." Within days, the speech spread, through inboxes, newsletters, bulletin boards. A teacher laminated a copy and pinned it beneath the founders' portraits in the library. No one took it down. By summer's end, Principal Kent announced his early retirement, personal reasons. Bellamy quietly vanished from the parent board. The space they left wasn't filled with bitterness, but reflection. At the first PTA meeting of the new year, someone proposed a new award, the Maddox Recognition for Unseen Service. It passed without debate. June never attended. She didn't need to. Her work was already done. Back home, she returned to her rhythm, fixing cars, tuning engines, helping neighbors who asked. A boy down the block, barely old enough to drive, brought her a broken sedan twice a week. She showed him how to rebuild a transmission from scraps. "You're teaching me how to survive," he said. June only smiled. One afternoon, June smiled, handed him a wrench, and said, "No, I'm teaching you how to stop asking for permission." The patch with the golden thread, "Honorary Command," stayed in her top drawer. She never wore it. Not because it didn't matter, but because it didn't need to be seen to be real. Like her impact, like her quiet presence, like the legacy she'd left behind, stitched into memory whether people liked it or not. Ethan started a blog. Small reflections at first. Thoughts about school, service, small-town myths, and what it means to grow up watching someone invisible shape entire lives. It didn't take long before it spread beyond their town. Readers from other states began leaving comments. One woman wrote, "My mother raised me the same way. This reminded me she wasn't weak, just quiet." Another said, "I was that kid in the back row. Thank you for showing what it means to rise with grace." When the school board invited Ethan to speak at the next year's graduation, he turned them down. "Let someone else take the spotlight," he said. "My mom's part is done. It's time for others to speak up." Still, the seat remained. At every ceremony afterward, one chair was left open in the front row. No plaque. No flowers. Just a simple, padded chair facing the stage. Some years, no one mentioned it. Other years, a student would ask. When they did, a teacher would smile and say, "It's for someone who never needed an invitation to belong." At the end of that first summer, June and Ethan stood outside their garage as the sun dipped behind the trees. The world had slipped back into rhythm, but they hadn't. They'd been changed, not by applause, but by truth finally being seen, if only once. Ethan turned to her. "Do you think people really change?" June didn't answer right away. She wiped her hands on an old towel, glanced down the quiet road, and said, "Some don't. But the ones who matter, yeah, they do." As the crickets began to sing and the porch light flickered back on, the breeze lifted the jacket hanging by the door. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to whisper something she'd never expected to hear. Soft, certain, undeniable. "Thank you." And as the hum of evening wrapped around the house, a voice, steady, wry, familiar, seemed to echo somewhere just beyond the wind. "Thanks for riding the emotional roller coaster with QA stories. Buckle up, the next one's even twistier."